Hello everyone, welcome back to Morgan Hasn't Seen for the start of a new series. Ghost movies have returned to Morgan Hasn't Seen, Jeannine. It's very, very exciting. And we are back with a video show for this episode as well. You can and might possibly be watching this on the It's a Wonderful Podcast YouTube channel. Go and subscribe, ding your notification bells if you are over here watching, and if you are not, go over and do that if you have not already anyway, because that's very exciting and very very fulfilling for us. We like that, and I'm very excited to get on with this episode today because this is another one of my bucket list movies. We've done 3 in a row now on episodes of Morgan Hasn't Seen, crossing over into a new series. And, you know, for this show, this movie that is one of the 90s great romance movies, or at least one of its most iconic and kind of one with a significant iconic scene, a significant legacy behind it, really, I suppose, based off that one scene. But there's plenty of critical reception for this movie at the time as well. It was a multiple Oscar winning movie. It won 2 Oscars, I think, for 1990. Ghost. We are, of course, talking about. What better movie to start off a ghost movie series than the simplest ghost movie title you could possibly wish for. There's no interesting, it might be a ghost movie, it might not be a ghost movie about this one. No, you're pretty sure right from the title this is going to be about ghosts. So, yes. I'm sure this is a movie you are most fond of in your romance-loving mind.
Yes, I'm a rom-com girly, so this has been in my repertoire of films that I love to watch. My introduction to Tony Goldwyn, who, you know, people love now from the show Scandal. So seeing that this was on your bucket list, knowing that Ghostbusters Frozen Empire was coming out this month and you hadn't seen Afterlife, all kind of just culminated in me deciding to do Ghost Movies Part 2, because, you know, we typically save spooky themed things like this for October. We've done vampire series and we've done a ghost series in past October series on the show, but we're bringing back ghosts again because it's just a ghostly month with ghostly things happening, and another fun way to knock something off your bucket list. So I thought it would be perfect to do a part 2 of the Ghost series. So we're going to be covering some interesting things this month, starting with this movie Ghost. This was a big one, and was very excited to see your thoughts on it, if you were going to get into the, you know, the romance, but of course it also gets kind of dark and mysterious. There's like a mystery aspect that, you know, our character has to solve. It gets very dark and with demons and the ideas of death and, you know, all of that. So
yeah, I mean, right off the bat, I was quite struck by the fact this movie's directed by Jerry Zucker of the Zuckers of Airplane and Naked Gun and other such things like that.
Very strange.
Very strange.
About,
rather bizarre that he comes out and directs a movie that ultimately becomes what this becomes, quite a way away from ridiculous visual comedy of those movies. But it's also clearly Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore at their absolute kind of height of peak I am a movie godness that they had at this particular time. I mean, it seemed like everybody wanted to be either one of these two people over a certain length of time, probably right around this movie, I would imagine. But you know, me being aware, you are aware of the grand popularity of these two and them together. I feel like Swayze was able to have this kind of charisma and charm with any of his stars, though, I suppose, in in his movies, most notably, I would say, with Mr. Keanu Reeves in Point Break, for example.
I love that that's what you brought up before Jennifer Grey, because I'm sure everyone was waiting for, of course, Jennifer Grey and Dirty Dancing. No.
No, Point Break. Keanu Reeves, Point Break, far more romantic than Dirty Dancing. I am of the opinion that it shouldn't be a romance in Dirty Dancing because she shouldn't actually be going about gallivanting at 17 years old. That's
with this grown man. Yes.
With this grown man. As great as Dirty Dancing is, which it is, admittedly. And we all like doing the performance, don't we? We all like trying to do the lift ourselves and breaking our necks doing it.
Yes, but I really appreciate you bringing up Point Break, early film that we actually covered on the only this second month of Morgan Hasn't Seen. So
yeah, it was actually, wasn't it? It's nice to have Patrick Swayze back.
Yeah,
it is after a great length of time. But I mean, they're obviously great together, and their romance is central to this movie.
Yeah.
But precious little of what's going on in this movie is actually them two together.
Yeah.
Because for the vast majority of the movie, obviously, right after 10 minutes, Patrick Swayze is killed and becomes the titular ghost.
Yes, and I like that reveal.
Can't see.
Yeah, and I like that reveal of it. When they get attacked by a seeming mugger and he is shot, we see him chase after the mugger, and then we're like, okay, what happened? And then he goes back to check on Molly, and then he sees his body and she's holding his dying body, and he's looking at himself and he's so scared and confused. And so it's this out of body thing. So I love these reveals of people kind of finding out that they're dead and how they chose to kind of go about illustrating that in this movie.
Yeah, it's basing the supernatural in this movie in a very kind of realistic world, a very realistic sense, you know, an idea that's not over fantastical. So you still connect with the ghosts that are in this movie. You still have that full human connection with Patrick Swayze, even though he's a ghost, because it's presented and executed in this really kind of low fantasy kind of way.
Yeah,
so
and it's still, you know, yeah, and you know, in its most basic form, it is a genre film. So, like those films need to do, vampire movies, werewolf movies, you set up your rules for that kind of known genre character. So, vampire movies will have different rules for their vampires. Zombie movies will have different rules for their zombies. So, this movie, being a romantic film, sets up its own rules for how they see the supernatural aspects of ghosts and that whole kind of outer body experience. So I liked, you know, the rules they created of, you know, you have to kind of concentrate your energies in order to touch things, and how you can go into somebody's body and use them as kind of this conduit. And because every movie, you know, does ghost a little bit differently. So the rules that they set up here really work well with the story that they're crafting in terms of really centering it around this romantic plot point. So
yeah, I mean, I am quite interested to hear what you might think I would have thought about this movie. Like, what were you expecting me to think about this movie? Because obviously, I think we'd wanted to do this movie for quite a while on the show anyway. It was on my bucket list for the 250th episode for a reason. And if you are here on YouTube watching this special episode today, then, you know, go and watch the 250th too if you haven't watched that. That is
and see
available to watch. And see the rest of my bucket list for Morgan Hasn't Seen that I came up with for that.
because it is after that 250 of the show, I did make it my mission to now this year try to incorporate every movie from your bucket list in a series in one way or another throughout the year so that you'll watch everything that has been on your bucket list. So that's the mission. So I'm glad we've knocked out 3 now. And this, you talk about kind of the popularity of this film and us wanting to do it. What we want to try to do is do kind of these bracketed polls to figure out what episode of the show will actually be a video podcast. Over the years, people have asked why we haven't done, video and audio versions of the podcast, because I think that's what most podcasters do. But, because of our time differences, our schedules, it's very difficult for us to be presentable because we record at sometimes random times in the middle of the night, midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, 5 a.m. for you. So, we can't always do a video version of the podcast, but this year is a new year for us, and we want to try to do more video versions of the podcast. So if we can at least try to do one a month, and we, bracketed all the films that we're covering for March, and this was the winner. People wanted to see this movie as the video version of the podcast. So I think that also speaks to kind of the popularity of this movie and the want to discuss it and you to see it for the first time. So
yeah, definitely. But yes, what did you think I was going to make of Ghost?
Well, I thought you would probably be longing for more of the darker elements to be part of the film and like those aspects more than the romantic stuff. I think you would have I was expecting you to really be more into him kind of learning how to like attack people and his whole kind of storyline with Carl and the villains of the film and all of that kind of darker stuff and him with the creepy subway guy and all of that kind of I figured you would lean into wanting to see more of that as opposed to kind of the mushy romantic stuff.
Rather interestingly, perhaps this is just how I have grown over the time perhaps we have even known each other, Jeannine. I think those aspects were my least favourite aspects of the movie.
Wow, okay.
Not to say that obviously there were still great aspects to the movie. I think this is a really good movie. I very, very much enjoyed this movie. But at its heart, it's a romance movie. The romance is going to take centre stage. The need for that connection from Swayze is going to take centre stage. Well, from Demi Moore's side as well. And eventually, obviously, when it does come to a more clear connection between the two of them, and there's actual, how we end the movie, them being able to see each other and look each other in the eyes and actually have kind of one final moment together when we've gone through 2 hours of movie of him trying to convince her and the world around her that he is still present somehow, and figuring out why he ultimately was murdered, because we find out he was murdered. The attack on him was not random, it was planned. So it's all this almost noirish kind of figuring out of as to what exactly and went on with him and why somebody would have wanted to do away with him, who this person was. When we find out who this person was, sorting that out, getting a certain level of revenge, but centering it all around this need to be connected to somebody else in a way weirdly quite similar to last week's episode we did on the lobster. It's really focused on just the need
connection
to be connected to this other soul, this other person who you are just endlessly and forever connected to. And that's kind of how I always viewed Ghost, having never seen it. I'm glad it was that, and I'm glad I took on a real appreciation for all those elements in it, more so than the physical being a ghost aspect, like the actual being a ghost and the world of the ghosts and what have you, and seeing
Yeah.
other ghosts around the place. Yes, it's interesting, but if I want that, you can go to something like Beetlejuice or something like that doesn't
Yes, well, I mean,
involve.
even the
Yeah, but
noirish aspects I thought you would be into more, like the noirish
oh,
mystery.
definitely. No, 100%, 100%, I'm into the mystery of it. Definitely, I'm into the mystery of it. But it's a romance movie first and foremost, so that is elevated to the front in the movie's mind and is therefore in my mind as well. So I can't help but be drawn most to those aspects of it. And look who,
Okay.
again, look who we have leading this movie. Patrick Swayze is one of the most phenomenally handsome men you could wish
Yes.
for.
Yeah.
And he was at this time. I am overwhelmed by the eyes of Patrick Swayze.
Yes,
This is what
your
happened.
your little subtitle there is very fitting. You're ready to get Swayze, apparently.
Let's get Swayze. Yes. But no, there's for some reason somehow there are certain people who are able to. I mean, usually, okay, it's women, but there are certain male celebrities who are just like you speak about Gregory Peck in Roman Holiday all the time, and it's just something that I sit back and go, I get it. I entirely
Yeah.
get it. It makes perfect sense. There is nothing about that man that is not entirely appealing, and that's Patrick Swayze in this movie.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
want, I want a Patrick Swayze. I want in soul. I want a Patrick Swayze in this movie, not necessarily in physical person. I wouldn't really
just
know
the
what to do.
spirit
I
of
wouldn't
him
want to be
following you
doing anything
around.
with that sort of thing.
I mean,
But
we opened the movie with his shirt off, so I think they're already trying to, like,
we do,
reel you in.
and kind of weirdly for me as well. What is the most famous scene of this whole movie? It's the Unchained Melody pottery scene.
Pottery scene,
Because
yes.
they're all, and he's all behind Demi Moore, and it's all messy, and they're getting the hands full of ceramic clay and all this kind of thing. And it's incredibly intensely romantic and
Yes.
beautiful to watch. And we've seen this scene endless times. I've seen this scene endless times anyway. It's taken completely out of context for the movie. I did not think this scene was so early in this movie. I have always thought that scene was of Ghost Patrick Swayze because I didn't know
How the
exactly,
ghost lore would work in this movie.
yeah, how the ghost would work. I thought the ghost might have been able to be seen, and it was simply just her being in love with a ghost. So I didn't
Oh,
know that.
okay. That they were a couple, and then she lost him, and then his spirit is
Yeah, I had
trying to
so I had no concept of that.
okay.
That's how I am with movies. I don't kind of over
Look
research
ahead.
movies
Yeah.
before I go and watch them. I don't like doing that. I like going in a little bit more blind, knowing a
Yeah.
base of what the movie is, having my own assumptions on what a movie might be, but then letting that movie be able to take me to wherever it wants to take me to. That's what I like about it. So I did not expect it so early in the
Okay.
movie. And do have one gripe with it in the fact that they immediately go from pottery and mushing all the fingers in all this ceramic to fun time situations, as we like to call it, because I don't like to use direct language when I'm talking about that sort of thing, because it
Sometimes
makes me uncomfortable for
situations.
some reason, even
Okay.
though it doesn't make me feel uncomfortable, but that's beside the point.
Okay.
Surely that's going to cause a problem when we start involving ourselves in fun time situations and our hands are full of clay that I'd like to point out will soon harden.
Yeah. Be a little messy.
And if you're feeling up on each other and touching certain locations of one another's body and getting clay everywhere, and
Yeah.
that clay then hardens,
Oh,
we're going to be having
painful.
dreadful issues, aren't we?
Yes, that I feel like that would be pretty messy. So
Not
you're
all, I'm
saying
just
you
saying
you
anybody.
You
Anybody that's
felt like
tried
that.
doing this, anybody that's watched Ghost and has tried doing this in real life, why?
I think
Because you're just gonna get
any sane
clay
person
everywhere,
would follow this scene with a romantic shower scene. And then
which makes more sense rather
yeah.
than just straight up getting into bed and getting clay God knows where. You'd be washing it out of certain areas for ages.
Oh my gosh.
It'd be
Yeah.
horrendous. It might cause infection. It could go very, very bad. I'm just
You
saying.
got very logical about this scene. I appreciate the breakdown and the logical thought. I really do.
Beautifully
Um,
shot romantic scene, but you've not thought
you've
about
not thought it
the.
through. Yes, it should have been
You've not
followed by
thought
a
it through.
steamy romantic shower scene, you know.
Yes.
But generally, I like that you kind of were surprised by how it was executed in terms of you thinking it was something completely different because it's such a famous scene. So I like that you kind of went into it thinking it was going to be one thing and it was something completely
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. I mean, I like that as well because it took me off guard and made me really focus on actually what the movie wanted to tell me, what the movie wanted to
Yeah.
tell us, what it
And
was actually saying about the dedication people can have towards one another, even in the afterlife or the supposed afterlife, the
yeah.
purgatory afterlife, whatever this state that Swayze's living in for the majority of this movie is. It's not quite
Yeah,
made
we see
exactly
him.
clear.
Well, once he kind of realizes he's dying and dead, like we see the light and we see him walk away from it. So there
Yeah.
is this telling us of this kind of light that you go towards and you go upward and all of that. They don't really get, they keep it vague and they don't
Unless
get
you're evil,
specifically.
that
Yes.
is.
There's a whole different vibe you get when you are evil. We do see that. Um
There's some iffy special effects going on in this movie as
yes.
well, I must
I mean
admit.
1990, they're doing their best. But did you feel like they set up this kind of uh epic deep romance in the
Yeah.
first little bit of the film so that, his need to comfort her and be there for her and all the depression and pain she's going through really you could feel that? Did you get enough of them as a couple to really believe that the spanning of this love story in
I
life
think
and
so,
death
but I think
beyond?
yeah, I really think so, but I think this is a testament to the romantic qualities of both of these actors. Because they've always been able, or they were always able to pull off this sort of heavy romantic emotion with anybody they came up against with in these kind of movies.
Yeah.
So it's the quality of the performances that allows that to actually continue to exist, that feeling to continue to exist throughout the movie. That doesn't necessarily work if you've got lesser actors in these roles.
Yeah.
So all the applause to Swayze and Demi Moore for that and making that feel very, very strong. With that famous scene sure helps and everything perfectly coming into shape
Yeah.
in the pottery scene, obviously. And it really is an example of every little facet of movie making just working in total tandem with each other
Yeah.
absolutely perfectly to a goal, to a given goal
Yeah,
of just one scene.
and I think with romance films, it always works seeing, attractive people being attracted to each other.
Yeah,
You know,
and
it
successful people and creative people, and
yes,
they're all these, both of them in
but
this
I
movie.
think they also have to have chemistry because you can have 2 very attractive people on screen, and if you're not believing this love story, if you're not believing the chemistry, then it kind of kills what the film is trying to do anyway. So the fact that these actors are incredibly attractive, but they also have great chemistry and they're very believable as this couple. We get to see a bit of their day to day. We get to see their simple interactions, them just in bed talking, and they're renovating this apartment together, kind of moving in together, starting this next phase of their relationship and life together. And then, we see them in these romantic scenes. So I think they give us a fairly decent enough kind of span of different aspects of their relationship before we lose him to
Yeah.
the human world. Um, in kind of a short time. And then we get into these deeper elements of him really figuring out what's happening to him because he's really confused at first. So this is when we kind of go and we meet other ghosts. His body ends up at the hospital, so he's at the hospital and he meets another ghost. Which, as soon as I saw the guy playing this first ghost he meets, I was reminded of a very sad story about this actor that I had
Okay.
recently heard. So the first ghost he meets is kind of this old man who's telling him how it works in terms of the ghost world and how long people last and all of this kind of thing. And he's played by an actor named Phil Leeds. So I listened to the podcast Pod Meets World. It's a Boy Meets World podcast hosted by three of the major cast members. One of them being Danielle Fishel, who played Topanga on the show. So they're talking about an episode in which Phil Leeds, this old man actor, guest starred. And she remembers being on set and him nudging, I think, Ben Savage, the actor who played Corey on the show. And she was in earshot, so she heard what he said. And this old man who says of a 16, 15-year-old Danielle Fishel, "I'd like to nosh her broccoli."
Oh
And she
dear.
literally heard that. And so she's talking about this on the podcast and just like, "Excuse me, what?" So I mean, they have a humor about it and they kind of joke about it on the show, like, really?
Right,
But
right, right. Yes.
so as soon as I saw him, I was just like,
But
"Nosh broccoli, oh god."
what sort of a
That's
phrase
Sam,
is that?
right?
What the hell sort of a phrase is that to use with
Yeah,
you can't be getting away with saying things like that. That's
yeah.
like me calling it fun time situations, but 30 times worse.
Yes, and so, like, you saw how old this man looks in 1990. When he guessed it on Boy Meets World, that was, like, 5, 6 years later, and he's saying this about a 15, 16-year-old Danielle Fishel. So, yeah, as soon as I saw him, I'm like, "Ugh, that's the broccoli man." Yeah,
That's
so,
horrific.
yeah. Hollywood. Hollywood be nasty.
No, that I don't even know how to move on from that. That's just not nice at all. Let's move on from that
Yes.
by talking about when the movie develops a certain level of rather pleasant humor, which
Yeah.
is with the inclusion and introduction to Oda Mae Brown. Is her name
Yes.
Brown? Oda Mae Brown, as played by Whoopi Goldberg, the psychic
Oscar-winning.
medium who
Yes.
Oscar-winning Whoopi Goldberg for this movie. Yes, you are entirely right. The psychic medium who pretends she's a psychic medium because her mother and her grandmother were psychic mediums and real ones.
Yeah.
But she's never been able to be a real psychic medium. But she's working on the legacy of her own family, and she seems to be quite successful in her own little world. She's got a busy little shop. But well, Swayze strolls in and gives her food for thought because she starts to actually hear
Hear
him
him.
and actually
Yes.
feel him.
So she's kind of scamming somebody, pretending she can hear their loved one, giving these generic responses. So her mother, did have a gift, but she had never, like you said, never felt it or, thought that it passed to her until Sam kind of finds his way to her space and she can hear him talking. And so
Yeah, I
once he
refuse to call him
realizes,
Sam. I refuse to call him Sam in this movie simply because his name is a little bit stupid. Not the name Sam. There's nothing wrong with the name
I mean,
Sam.
didn't you
His
say
full
this
name.
film was nominated or it won for Best Original Screenplay?
Yeah, I think it won for Best Original Screenplay
I
as
mean,
well.
I think
Those
it
were the
should have.
two Oscars this got.
Yes. I think it should have lost simply because whoever was writing this chose to make his name Sam Wheat. Like, why?
Wheat.
Was he just eating his breakfast one day and looked over at his box of cereal and said, "That's the surname I want for this lead character,
That's what I
Sam
want.
Wheat." I mean, the only thing
Must
Molly
be.
won from the loss of him was that she wouldn't end up being Molly Wheat. But
Molly
That's
Wheat. That's even worse than Sam
something
Wheat.
she could put in the plus column of losing him, if anything. Um, but yeah, Sam Wheat is his name, and it's just like, have you ever met anybody with the surname Wheat?
I
Wheat.
haven't, no, but I feel like if there's anybody listening to this now with the surname Wheat, I do apologise. We don't mean to offend you, but you've got a silly last name. Get a regular last name like anything else.
But Wheat. So yeah, Sam Wheat. She's able to hear him, and she freaks out because she obviously, this is not normal for her. She pretends to hear people. So when she actually hears him,
Yeah.
and just the illustration of us, we have to she has to perform it like he's not in the room with her, but he is there. So we see him speaking to her, but she can only hear his voice. So just the logistics of how they would have to film these scenes, how Whoopi has to perform that like he's not there.
Yeah.
I thought was really all well handled.
It actually is. It is not an easy. It can't be an easy skill as an actor to act opposite somebody who is physically there, but you're supposed to pretend he's not physically there.
Yeah.
It can't be easy to just not look at them or not physically interact with them or
Yeah.
physically react with them. Mirror body language like people
Yes.
do in conversation.
Or act like you're moving around them because they're
Yeah.
in your way. Yeah.
So it's really, really greatly done. And, everybody has to do that with Patrick Swayze for
Yeah.
the rest of this movie. And he has to do that with everybody else he comes across in the rest of this movie. And an awful lot of it is obviously him speaking through Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah.
And them having kind of
Banter
arguments
and
between the two of
yes.
them.
And
That
that's where a lot of
appear
the
to be
comedy comes from. Yeah.
It is, yeah, because they appear to be Whoopi Goldberg arguing with thin air from
Yeah.
an outside perspective, which is obviously quite funny in itself. The humour's dealt with really well. It never gets silly or anything like that. It never becomes outlandish, which you might expect from Zucker being the director of.
Yeah.
It never gets to that, but it always lands. It always feels like a good bit of levity. There's a great balance to this
Mhm.
movie because we are dealing with a movie that is funny at times, that is dark and nasty at times, that is a mystery movie, but that is also a romance movie and also a supernatural movie. I mean, it encompasses
Juggling a
my
lot.
it's juggling a lot, but it does it really well,
Mhm.
and it does encompass my mentality on the vague idea of the 90s movie that I
Yeah.
always bring up that has 74 things going on at any given time. 90s movies refuse to be simplistic, flat out mainstream 90s movies, major Hollywood movies of this time. And it often annoyed me and put me off
Yeah.
movies of this era because there's just why is there so much going on? And at times I do feel that in this movie. At
Okay.
times I do feel like it's just doing a little bit too much, which is why maybe I don't need the logistics of being a ghost aspects of this movie and the learning to to have these ghostly skills and interacting with other
Okay.
ghosts. I don't need that in this movie. It might be one layer too much, I
Okay.
think, for my preference as to what's going on, but it doesn't. It's not a detriment to the movie. It doesn't spoil the movie at all. I think it just is something in there that feels worthwhile, but not entirely necessary. Whereas the rest of those examples of what this movie is that I've just given feel totally necessary to what this movie is trying
Okay.
to be.
I mean, I think, yeah, I feel like when you say it's like a layer too far, I think it's really just there so that the character in death can still be the one to get the revenge against the people who betrayed him. So he can
Yeah,
physically freak them out and attack them and ultimately lead them to their demises because he has this ghost skill of being able to, you know, channel his energies into touching people and touching things.
yeah,
So
but
I think
maybe I
that's
just
only
need
necessary for kind of the final revenge aspects against these characters.
it is, yeah, but I still think you can have that revenge and have him do that without us having
A
it
whole
all
little
be
lesson.
explained preemptively, and us have these lessons, us have these odd interactions with other ghosts. Like, I feel like this should be really, if it wants to be such a low fantasy movie, it should be the lowest of low fantasy
Okay.
and be what is essentially a romantic mystery that just happens to have its male lead as a ghost rather than still a ghost movie. It's because
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
still a supernatural movie.
yes. I mean, I get what you're saying because, I think had they been able to pace it and give those scenes more time and if you're going to delve and dabble into the world of other ghosts and that they're around and they see things and they do things and they react differently, um then that maybe would have been better had they been able to flesh that out, because if you're gonna show us, give us
Yeah,
more of that. But the fact that we don't
yeah.
really get a lot of that, it's only kind of there to serve a singular purpose, then it does kind of feel like, um, a little too much going on with everything else this film is trying to juggle. I mean, I found it interesting, um, the little bit that we did get to kind of learn about how ghosts handle death and, um, like the man he does learn these skills from is really broken and kind of scary. And,
Yeah.
being in this limbo state for him has just kind of warped him into this dark kind of creature, almost angry and,
I
ghosts
mean, there's great
handling.
casting as well, though, by the way.
Yes. Yes.
Why
Ghosts
why
just
would you not cast what's his name?
I
Vincent
know.
Schiavelli
Yeah,
as
great character
as
actor, has this face for these dark kind of things.
yeah.
Just I know his face in like the Tim Burton aspect from, Batman Returns and things like that. Um, but yeah, I liked getting this little look at how different people handle their deaths and how it affects them differently. Um, but if we're gonna go there, if you're going to even kind of develop that a little bit, give us a little bit more or don't give us it at all is kind of where you're sitting with it.
It is, yeah, and that's why I feel more drawn to just the basic romance of the
Mm,
movie, because that's primarily what the movie wants to focus on. It's what it succeeds best at being, I think, because even as a mystery, it kind of solves its own mystery reasonably early.
well, yeah, I mean, it's a whole thing of, he's with Molly, they just saw a show, they're walking home, they get attacked, he gets shot, and the guy runs away. Then on his death, he's kind of keeping an eye on Molly, and he's in their apartment, and he sees the man who killed him break into the apartment. He's snooping around for things. So now he's like,
Yeah,
how is this
Swayze
man who,
does.
yes, Swayze's ghost is wondering how this man who supposedly killed me at random is now in my apartment snooping around. And then Molly comes home, the guy is there. Um, the cat scratches him and he runs away. So now it's this level of, okay, there's something bigger going on here. So
Yeah,
now it's him trying to figure out who this guy is, what is he doing? It has something to do with Sam's bank job. Um, and then we kind of get this reveal that his best friend, Carl, played by Tony Goldwyn, is involved as well. So that ends up kind of being the big reveal. Not really that there's this whole kind of money laundering scheme happening, because I think he learns that it has something to do with money and his job at the bank and some passwords that
yeah.
he had access to, and that's why somebody was looking for them. Um, and so I think all of that kind of gets solved fairly quickly, but it isn't until kind of near the end that he realizes that it's his best friend who was the one who laundered the money, who hired this man who killed him, and all of that.
Yeah, it's which is obviously quite a gut punch, but really does
Yes.
paint Tony Goldwyn as a very deplorable human being.
Villain, yes. He was a great villain in this, and I think that's kind of what labeled him for many years. Um, and then he was able to voice Tarzan and, endear
He did.
himself, and then Scandal, and then everyone fell in love with him as President Fitz and all of that. So, but I think he was kind of labeled he got that kind of, label as, I can't remember his name, Atherton's his name from Ghostbusters, as this kind of just hated
As
90s
yes.
figure,
Yeah.
um,
Oh,
for several years. I think William Atherton is his name, I can't remember, until he kind of did other things. So, just speaks to him being this kind of weaselly backstabber because he was his best friend, and then,
yeah.
not just him, having his friend killed to get these passwords for his laundering schemes. Now he's also trying to take his girl and get with Molly.
Yeah,
Uh,
which is I mean, which is for me, I just felt this was one step too far. I can handle money laundering and assassination attempts, but
but
stealing the man's girlfriend as well, you're
yeah,
taking it one step too far.
too
Like,
far, Tony Goldwyn.
I'm almost of the opinion that if you were just trying to steal his girlfriend, like, okay, but you're
I
not the
mean,
worst person ever.
she's
Like,
gorgeous. I mean,
yeah, I get it. I understand this. I get what you're doing. If that's if that's the only if
one or
that's
the
the
other,
only thing
Carl.
that's making you if that's the only thing that's making you the villain of this movie, that's not quite villainous enough.
We need
You
more.
know, we need more.
Yeah,
Or take it on the other angle of
him being
him
behind the whole.
just being yeah, behind the money laundering, and maybe he didn't directly order an assassination of his best friend, but Swayze might have been just caught in the crossfire or something
Yes,
like that.
of him
But
needing to
no,
get those passwords, yeah.
Tony Goldwyn is doing absolutely every possible thing to the most extreme wrong level
Yeah.
in this, while being while never being outwardly evil. It's a great low key snaky performance.
Yes, and then the struggle of Patrick Swayze because he's not there, he's not in the room, he can't, we're with him like, "Molly, no, don't trust
Yeah,
him," like, we're there with him and she
can't
can't
smack
hear
him in the
him.
face.
So this tense struggle of him trying to communicate with her and she can't hear him, and she's just being, taken in by this guy who was their best friend. Um,
Yeah,
and then, he's able to use, Oda Mae to help him kind of speak to Molly in certain scenes. Um, and it works. Like she feels like she's really communicating with Sam. She's believing that
yeah,
because Sam is feeding Oda Mae like private information, things that only Sam would know and only things that were between the two of them. So
and it
when she kind of
takes
yeah,
those, confirmation instances for her to fully
yeah, which
realize
also create
what's going on.
also build the romance between the two of them because every time, something is said that's this cute thing that we saw from them together,
Yeah.
the beautiful score by Maurice Jarre kind of chimes
Oh,
in
yeah.
and, we get these beautiful moments. And I think I remember telling you about Demi Moore having probably the most beautiful cry in movies,
Yeah,
particularly in
that's
this
a fair
film.
point.
And so when we get these still shots of her face and the tears just streaming out of her eyes without her face, squinting or moving around, and the score sweeps in and it's Whoopi Goldberg telling her some private thing that she shared with him, them
Yeah.
not being together, we're still getting the romance between the two of them. So they're able to do that in so many scenes just from this kind of interpretive situation that they're in, which I think is
Yeah.
really great.
I mean, that's emphasized at the very end of the movie, obviously, when it gets to such a stage that we've dealt with our villain at this point, but I'm talking about the romantic climax of the movie,
Yeah.
which is, Demi Moore actually being able to see ghost Patrick Swayze and actually look into each other's eyes, and we get this, your vision of beautiful crying again
Yeah.
from Demi Moore, and it's this whole "I love you" ditto thing that I can imagine melted everybody's hearts in
Yes.
1990, and admittedly gave me that little bit of a punch into the stomach, which it wanted to, and it did, and it should have done. You can't help being overcome by a certain emotion in
Oh, yeah.
scenes that are presented like this, especially like you said, when you've got a beautiful score playing behind it all, and
Yeah.
it's this heavily emotional romantic climax, and you get
Yeah.
the callback line to something that happened before,
Yeah.
and before somebody floats off into death, I suppose, or the afterlife, or whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
um, it's very, very emotional. However, I don't trust beautiful criers, Jeannine,
Why?
because if you're crying, you should the best cry. You might consider Demi Moore the most beautiful crier. I wouldn't have an argument against that. That's a very, very fair point. I don't think I've ever seen anybody cry without moving the face at all before, which is what she's able to do. She's able to retain her great beauty when in the most teary of mindsets. However, really, when people cry, they
They're like,
become phenomenally ugly, don't they?
"Ah."
Sobbers
Yeah.
are the best criers, movie criers. I want sobbing. I want every sweat. I want
I
snot
mean,
dripping
and
from
it's
the nose.
probably why it's taking her so long to get over him, because she's not having a ugly cry. She's not
Yeah, she's
having
not
one of
crying
those
properly.
hard letting it out cry. Those are so therapeutic. You get it all out, and then you feel kind of better afterwards. But she is just having these pretty, soft dribble down sobs. And so she's gonna be sad for him forever unless she has a good, strong, ugly cry, I think.
It's like
So
old Hollywood it's like 30s, 1930s glamour star
yeah,
crying when it's
yeah,
just you're only allowed one tear, and that shows all the emotion we need. It's like,
yeah.
that's great given the context of the movie, but you should be more sad, more visibly sad than this. This is just what the movie wants it to be, though. This is
And
just
I mean,
how Demi Moore is as an actor. You can't fault it. There's nothing wrong with it at
yes, and
all.
I mean,
I just
I
happen to be somebody that prefers in my criers in movies somebody that is giving it a
all
real belt
breakdown.
out cry.
Yes, and I mean, I think it's also something that probably happens to women. They want them to cry pretty. I remember Jessica Alba telling a story from Fantastic Four, the second one, the Rise of the Silver Surfer. There's a scene where she's meant to cry, and the director kind of berated her and told her she needed to cry pretty, and she was not crying
Okay.
pretty enough or something like that. It's a story she's told several times. So, I can only imagine if this was a thing that was asked of her to not wince up her
Yeah.
face and, just let the tears fall beautifully like that, and, you know, um, and really play up the kind of just beautiful nature of the moment and not have this
Yeah.
loud kind of visceral sobbing happening. But yes, like I always watch this and I'm like, she is such a pretty crier. She's probably the most pretty crier in films because I think she cries like this in other movies too. Um, but yeah, I like the scenes where Oda is there to kind of be this conduit communicator, and then the friendship that kind of forms between Sam and her when she's trying to help him, do the things that he can't do himself. And ultimately, the smart kind of plan that he comes up with to stop Carl and all of his kind of behind the scenes doings. So that scene when they're able to get the money out of the account before Carl can, because I think
Yes.
he owes it to some drug dealers or something like that. And when he realizes the money is gone, it's like $4 million. He's sweating buckets. He's panics.
Yeah.
Tony Goldwyn plays this panic so well, like you feel it. And he's in the bank and he's going on the computer trying to figure out what happened, and Sam is screwing with him and writing murder on the computer screen and just writing Sam
Yeah.
over and over again. And we get like some really fun, almost horror type of elements here. You know the terrified he's playing almost feels like a Poe kind of character
Kind of. This
with
th
something just haunting and nagging you, and the panic and the fear.
Yeah.
Even with the guy who ultimately murdered him, the Willie character, how he gets terrified from Patrick Swayze kind of haunting him and pushing him around, and the fear we see in how this kind of revenge is illustrated against these evil characters is, as somebody like me who loves seeing villains, get it. I love
Yeah.
comeuppance.
Yeah.
Um,
It
those things are great, and they play the fear. You feel that fear, and you're just like, it gives you like these really fun kind of horror elements in this movie out of nowhere, and I think those scenes are really fun.
You do. You get great comeuppance in this movie.
Yeah.
I like what you say in likening it to a Poe story, because it is to a degree
That whole scene
the
with Carl figuring it out, the
yeah,
panic there.
there's often a sense of unspoken guilt or dread, or
Mhm.
you've done something wrong. When are you going to get your comeuppance with Poe's central characters? So it does happen. I didn't necessarily think about that, but when you've brought it up there, it
Yeah.
very much is prevalent in that sense. I suppose, though, that can be said for many other ghost-based movies and haunting-based movies. It is some
Yeah.
unseen, unspoken entity that is there. Clearly, we know Swayze's there, but in other ghost movies, it is there. But your character who it is haunting doesn't see it, doesn't recognize it
Yeah.
as anything but their own mind playing with
Yeah.
themselves, and that's what it is,
Yeah,
which
because
is
it isn't until
it's
Carl, he ends up coming after Oda Mae and Molly and is chasing them, and, he ultimately gets pushed into a open window that's kind of broken, and the window stabs him and kills him. And so it isn't until his kind of ghost self leaves his body that he sees Sam, and then he
yeah,
realizes that it's real, that it was Sam all the time. And yeah, and then we get our our great CGI that you mentioned of the kind of ghouls. We saw it earlier with the Willie character who ended up dying in a very similar way to Sam. Like, we don't know that he's dead until we see his ghost seeing his body, which I think
yeah,
is just, again, a really cool illustration of that. And then because he was an evildoer, these demons, shadows come out and like drag his ghost away.
yeah. You are entirely right. It is a great depiction of death that you actually get in this movie. This unsure of whether a character has died or not until the movie shows you them looking at their own dead body.
Yeah.
It's great like that. And Carl's death scene with this glass window stabbing him right through the chest is quite strikingly gory for this movie. I
Yeah.
was not quite
Yeah.
expecting this level of blood splatter
Yeah.
going on in what I at first viewed as a romantic drama.
Well, I mean, even with
Um,
Sam's death, like, Molly is covered with blood when she's trying to, like,
right, yeah,
help,
that's
calling for
true,
help,
actually.
holding him. Yeah.
That is true, but, I spoke about the iffy CG before. I actually really like this might be the most obvious depiction of the iffy, and I use the word iffy lovingly, and by iffy,
Yeah.
I do mean slightly dodgy. And by dodgy, I mean not a British word, Morgan, please, so you can be a bit more universal and appeal to others from other countries. What would you even what's the American equivalent to the word iffy, Jeannine?
I mean,
'Cause
dodgy is the same kind of
I'm just gonna use the word naff as well, so I'll just keep on
yes,
this
be
train.
wholly British. Be
Okay.
wholly British.
Um, naff CGI. It's not even this scene that bothers me about the naff CGI. It's
Which
the
scene is
when
it?
he when he's trying to put his hand through the door. Patrick Swayze trying to put his hand through a solid door and then take his
Uh,
entire body through it. It's just, what's going on here? I thought I wasn't expecting this in this movie either.
I
I
mean, we
didn't
get
think
a Dirty Dancing level kind of dance jump through, the door as well in a certain scene.
that's true, yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. But no, I really like these little dark,
Demon
shadowy
things, yeah.
figures that come in and escort not Sam, escort Carl off to hell at the
Yeah,
end, because that's clearly
and
where they're taking
Lily.
I mean, they chain him up like Scrooge
Yes, and the
or like
score sh and it the
Marley,
yes, and
and
the score even shifts to, like, these, like, hell trumpets, like, "Do do do do, do 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 do," kind
it's
of music. Like, very, like, the trumpets of the 4 horsemen, you know,
right?
like, very, very poignant, very kind of pushing that theme. I like that they don't set up a clear, like, this is heaven and this is hell, but they give you enough visuals that you can kind of
Oh,
just
it's enough.
put those pieces together. So they're not inherently
Yes.
calling out any kind of religious thing,
No, 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 no,
just
no,
these kind of
no.
vague ideas, which I think works.
It's just the good place and the bad place for all we
Yeah,
care, isn't it?
essentially.
That's
Yeah.
what it needs to be, that's all it needs to be. But it's right, I was just not expecting that level of supernatural
Supernatural. Yeah.
supernatural depiction in this
Mhm.
movie. The level of supernatural you get in this movie, yes, because I know it's a ghost movie, but the level of
Yes.
supernatural depiction
They were
I
gonna
was
take
not
it there. Yeah.
expecting. Like, I didn't even think like, in quite a lot of scenes, Swayze's got a certain fade to him or a glow to him
Yeah.
that makes him, look, quote, unquote, "like a
Like a
ghost."
ghost. Yeah.
And I just didn't think that was going to be the case. I just thought it would be Patrick Swayze, and we just recognize him to be the ghost because we
Yeah.
know he is the ghost. I didn't think they would actually have this,
Kind of
have
glowing
this
thing
effect
around him,
to
on
it.
him in certain scenes. Yeah.
So maybe I don't know, maybe I don't love the effects in the movie.
That's fair. I mean, it's
Again,
1990, still trying to
though,
innovate.
yeah, but again, though, you can't fault it. It doesn't
Yeah.
spoil anything. It's
No.
not a detriment to anything. It doesn't take me out of anything or anything like that. Um, I just wasn't expecting it, I suppose. But I do, admittedly, actually like the little black shadowy ghouls.
Okay, yes, like, I mean,
I like them.
that's what I was expecting you to really be into over kind of the romantic thing. I thought you were gonna like the mystery and, like, the ghosty ghoul kind of darker elements of these kind of freaked out characters running away and then these demons kind of coming to haul them away. The score, these evil trumpets kind of sounding.
No, all
You're
that
like,
with Carl at the end of Carl's life, I like.
yeah, okay.
That's great. But like I've said, this is a primarily a romance movie.
Mhm.
Its best element should be its romance, and its best element is its romance.
But I do like they also give this nice friendship moment, like, he tells Oda Mae goodbye, he tells her he's gonna miss her, that
Oh
her
god,
mother would
yeah.
be proud, so she does get this little moment, and, like, this is her first time seeing the form of him, she's only seen, like, a picture of him when she goes to Molly's and she sees, "Oh, is that you? You're cute. You're white, but you're cute."
Yeah, she basically says, "You're cute for a white guy."
Yeah, essentially. Um, but yeah, so I like the little friendship that kind of develops between the two of them, their little bickering and banter. But then ultimately, she helps him, and he's indebted to her, and so they have this,
Yeah.
moment before he kind of gets sent off. It's not just a moment with Molly. He takes the time to say, thank you to Oda Mae, and he's gonna miss her, and it's a nice, sweet friendship between the two of them. So I like those
And I
aspects
mean,
too.
I think it's perfectly reasonable to be considering Whoopi Goldberg for a supporting Oscar for this movie, because she is dealing with a lot of emotional difference in her performance in this movie. There's all kinds of things that she has to perform going on.
Yeah, and her comedy delivery is still very high and to the level we are
Yeah,
familiar, very sassy and fun, but it still doesn't take away from the serious moments, because there are moments where her character's in danger, so she's really scared. Like,
yeah,
there's that whole scene where they're in Molly's apartment and he's telling her what to say to Molly. And she's, doing it in her own way and being kind of sassy, you in danger, girl. That's kind of a a running
yes,
kind of known line from the movie and stuff like that. So their comedy is there. And then when he like says something about where Willie, this criminal, lives, she has a serious moment of, oh my gosh, that's my neighborhood. And she gets kind of scared and
yeah,
panicked. So she has to kind of shift her emotion. She has to talk to somebody who's not there. There's the great scene where now Sam has kind of opened up her ability. So now she can actually hear all of these ghosts talking to her, and
yes.
trying to talk through her, and
She
everybody's
gets
kind of
quite
talking to her at
overwhelmed.
once. And so the scenes where she has to play all these people kind of talking to her at once and then talking to the people in the room, and like the stress that's putting on her in that aspect as well. The very funny scene where she, is in the bank and she's kind of like messing things up. So she has a lot of fun levels to play, and the comedy isn't too far where it breaks out of the other aspects of the film. She times it really well and still is able to kind of ease back into the more serious elements of the film. So yeah, I think a very kind of underrated, you would think kind of off the first thought, like she got nominated for that. But then when you watch it and you think about
Won for that.
all the levels she had to play, like I think,
Yeah,
definitely merited that win and that nomination.
yeah. It definitely makes sense. I think Whoopi Goldberg is always great at doing the balancing act of sassy comedy, as we say,
Yeah,
with genuine poignancy,
yeah,
because she's able to use her face to a very sad degree as well, because she
yeah,
has these kind of big sad eyes,
yeah,
and she uses them.
yeah,
Actors should use their own features to their benefit, and I think
yeah.
Whoopi Goldberg always did. Um, I don't think we see Whoopi Goldberg in movies anymore, do we really? When was the
No,
last thing Whoopi
she's a
Goldberg
host on
did?
The View. I think she probably makes little cameo appearances and things, but I don't think she full on acts
No.
anymore. I know, Picard had his show, and I think he invited her back on to play her character
Okay.
from the show when he was on The View. But I don't watch Picard, so I don't know if that ever came to fruition.
Okay.
But when he
Okay.
was on The
But
View, he invited her to come on Picard and play her character again. So,
for Whoopi Goldberg's era, she nailed it.
yes.
And of course she nailed it. I always like Whoopi Goldberg in movies anyway. And this one, very, very much so. She used everything she's great at doing in the best way.
Yeah.
So why would it not be critically celebrated? It does make sense, and really, she probably is the highlight of the movie.
Yes.
To be honest,
And
Swayze's great, Demi
yeah.
Moore's great, but she
Yeah.
probably is just that one level kind of above, given the fact that she does have a bit more variety of things to do in her
Yes.
performance. I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, a history, I say again because we talked about this, um, on our, main show episode about Lilies of the Field, and again,
Yes, last week.
historically, important Oscar win with her. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Was let's try and figure this out. How many how many black people had won Oscars before Whoopi Goldberg? Hmm. I always can tell you the first three because I always like to trip people up with the third. The
Oh,
third black
yes,
person who ever won an
which
Oscar.
you
It's one
brought
of my
up
favorite
on
trivia questions.
yes, which you brought up on a recent episode
I
of
did, yes.
it's a podcast.
Let's think about
Um,
it. Harry McDaniel, Poitier, Isaac Hayes as the
yes.
third, and
Did,
then who?
was it, um, Louis Gossett Jr.? Did
Gossett
he
Jr.,
was that in the
Officer and
80s?
Gentleman, I wanna say.
Yeah, for Best
That
Supporting.
was in the 80s, I think.
Was he the first Best Supporting actor
Oh, that's a good question.
to win?
I don't know off the top of my head. I just don't know off the top of my head. He's definitely in there.
And
He's
Whoopi was the
definitely in
second Best Supporting Actress after Hattie
there.
McDaniel?
It must be,
So all
yes.
those years in between.
I don't think there's another Best Supporting Actress, definitely,
Yeah.
before this. Is there anybody else? Is there anybody else at all? There'll be people behind the scenes, there'll be musicians, there'll be
Maybe
sound designers and things like
screenwriters or something like that, yeah.
yeah. But, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have brought up that because it confused our minds at the end of this episode, didn't it?
Yes. We should
The
have done our
point being
research, but yes.
The point being that Whoopi Goldberg's Oscar win is still a significant Oscar win
Yeah.
in the
And for kind of a mostly comedic kind of performance. You know, she does a lot in this film, but I think the comedy is
Yeah.
probably what she was casted to do and to
Yeah.
bring to the film.
Even though she probably should have had it for
The Color Purple. Yes, 100%.
We're being honest with ourselves.
Yes, 100%.
It's a bit more of an Oscar-y movie, but
Yes,
there we go.
Ghost.
Ghost. 1990s Ghost. Lovely romance, pottery, singing. We're not going to do any singing. We can't sing Unchained Melody. It's a silly song to sing. Anyway.
Yes, very long holding of notes.
It's a song that has become too known for this scene, I think, because whenever it comes on now, everybody just wants to sit down and kind of get behind each other and go like this. Ooh,
yes, or it's used in a spoofy manner to kind of spoof
that
scene.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It's ruined itself, really, the pottery scene from Ghost, unfortunately.
A little bit.
It's a shame when that does happen to very notable movie scenes. They develop lives on their own.
They do, but
and then you struggle to put it in context when you're watching the movie itself, and then you think it comes at different parts of the movie. I'm sure we've had this many times on Morgan Hasn't Seen, I think, where we've got very notable parts of movies that I always thought were in completely different parts of the movie
or contexts
than what they end up being in, and
that's
this
always
was very much an example of that.
That's always a little fun bonus from watching the more popular films, because you getting to see these scenes and how you react to them because you're fully aware of them and their place in pop culture. And then when you get the context, it's either a surprise or exactly what you thought it would be. So that's always kind of a fun added little bonus. But my one sad thing is that Patrick Swayze did not get the chance to voice a Disney character, because then we would have a full leading cast of Disney voices in this film. You know, we have Esmeralda and Tarzan and Shenzi happening here, and Swayze just messes up the flow.
For God's sake, Swayze, you had to go and get ill, didn't you?
Yeah.
We can't blame Swayze for his unfortunate end to his life.
Yes.
Certainly not. It's very, very sad. But we like Patrick Swayze.
We do. He's great, and he had a great run of films.
We like Tony Goldwyn.
Yes. So yeah, I'm glad you finally watched this, and you know, this is a big one for Swayze, a big one for all of these actors, and
Yay. I'm very glad. I'm very glad to have ticked another off the bucket list to start the Ghost movie series.
Yes.
Morgan Hasn't Seen. What a great way to start it was. We will be back next week with another Ghost movie. I don't think we've quite decided which one's coming next week.
Well, I think I want to
have
save I think we are gonna do Ghostbusters Afterlife, so we do wanna save that for the week that Ghostbusters Frozen Empire comes out, which I believe is the 3rd week, so,
Okay.
yes. So I think next week will be Crimson Peak?
Oh, very exciting. Del
Mm,
Toro,
yeah.
Guillermo del Toro. Is it Tom Hiddleston, I believe, in Crimson Peak as
Yes.
well?
Yes, Tom Hiddleston.
And Mia Wasikowska, or however you
Yes.
pronounce her name.
Yes, and then Jessica Chastain, I believe, as well.
Jessica Chastain. Well, yes, very nice. Ghost movies, more ghost movies on Morgan Hasn't Seen coming very soon, but this is not the only show we have on the It's a Wonderful podcast feed. We have It's a Wonderful podcast itself, the main show every Friday celebrating old movies. As Jeannine just brought up as well, it was Lilies of the Field, Sidney Poitier's Oscar-winning movie last
Yes.
Friday. Very great discussion. Great discussion we had on Lilies of the Field as well, as we always do on a Friday, celebrating those old movies over there. Subscribe to this podcast feed, the It's a Wonderful podcast feed, wherever you are listening on all major podcast platforms. Of course, leave your ratings, reviews, answer those questions we put on Spotify. If you are here on YouTube, of course, watching today's episode, thank you very much for taking the time to watch today's episode. Subscribed in your notification bell here. Leave your comments and your likes down below what you think about this movie. Ghost movies. What are your favorite ghost movies? What are your favorite Swayze movies? And all that kind of stuff in those comments too. If you want to support us on Patreon or donate in any way, there will be links in the description to do that. We can't do what we do without that generous support. We love all our patrons very, very dearly, but you can, of course, just find us on social media on Twitter at It's a Wonderful One. Find me on Twitter at The Purple Don with a 3 instead of the E in the because, Jeannine.
3 is the magic number.
On Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at The Purple Dawn. All your pottery-loving stuff is where... I don't know why I'm doing this with my pottery at the moment.
You can find me at Jeannine Devine _ on Twitter, Jeannine Devine on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. If you want to get any merch for any of our shows, just check the description for the link or search It's a Wonderful Podcast on teespring.com. And if you want to purchase any of my art in print form, you can find that at my Big Cartel shop, g9design.bigcartel.com.
Well, I'm not going to get you to sing Unchained Melody, Jeannine, as you specifically asked me not to do that.
Yeah, that's all I'm doing.
So you were starting to do it then? Okay, I can sit back and let you do it if you want.
No. It's a little too bold for me. But
I was going to ask you to just do an impression of a ghost.
Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Now, how stupid would this movie have been
if he was that kind of ghost?
For the entire movie, spoke like that whilst wearing a white sheet. Bye.